Yep, everything is
Video,
going.
4K.
Start. Perfect. Okay.
So now it's recording.
I think we're good. Careful.
Okay. Don't worry.
All right. We're starting. The setup took 1 hour. That was a lot of work.
Well, it gets easier though each time that you do it.
Does it? Does it? Well, cheers first of all. Water.
Cheers.
Thank you so much, Ivana, for being on the show. Oh, Uncle. You guys have no idea. Where should I look? That's the main camera, right?
Yeah,
Okay. You have no idea. The setup alone took 1 hour. So Ivana was just helping me set up the space. We have 3 different angles for the first time. Yeah, so I'm just going to quickly introduce the episode and the guest today. I'm super, super excited. For the first time on Make Peace Not Beef, we're doing an in-person, in-studio, in-house recording with my guest in person. First time ever. I'm so excited. And I was being super extra on the last episode, so I have to tone it down this episode to kind of redeem myself because I was out of control. I do not know what I was drinking that night. So, yeah, well, hello, fellow peacemakers to Make Peace Not Beef. This is part 2 of 3 of the Ocean series. My guest today is Ivana Tay, an ex-Googler turned sustainability entrepreneur, and she is working on mass-producing seaweed bioplastic for commercial and industrial use as part of the fight against climate change. And she has a super interesting backstory as well as a super interesting background.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, so I'm gonna let Ivana talk and just introduce herself. Take it away, Ivana.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I don't think I've ever been in a live podcast before, so this is definitely a really cool experience. But yeah, I guess like to kind of add to what you said, I had worked in big tech at Google almost 8 years. And
wait, how old are you?
How old do you think? No, I'm just kidding. I'm 30.
Because you look 22.
Oh,
so when she said she worked 8 years, I'm like, did you start working when you were 14?
Oh my gosh, thanks. I've been using SPF since middle school, so
it works perfectly.
Thank you. That's so nice of you. But yeah, so I worked at Google for nearly 8 years, and honestly, I think like a lot of people during the pandemic, well, first of all, I had the privilege to sort of pause and reflect on what it was that I wanted to do with my time, and being locked indoors, I kind of realized, I spent my free time focusing on sustainability efforts. So at Google, I co-founded a group that was focused on the education of environmental sustainability, individual actions, and as well as group actions.
Right.
But it felt very sort of surface level to what I could actually be doing. So during the pandemic, I had a little bit of a revelation that I maybe, didn't want to work in ad tech forever and actually wanted to spend my time fighting the good fight against climate change. And so that was the impetus to leave the company. And right now I am a startup entrepreneur in the making. I can't say that I've built too much yet, but it is, right at the precipice of hopefully creating something meaningful.
See, when I first looked at you, I'm like, yeah, she's definitely Asian. I'm Asian. I can tell when the person is Asian.
Yes.
But then I took a closer look, and then we had a Zoom call, actually. So it was Julia who introduced Ivana to me. Shout out to Julia. She's one of my listeners. Super, super great. I'm actually going to do another episode with Julia, and we're going to talk about, feminine healing of the planet another day. That's another interesting topic of discussion. But she actually introduced me to Ivana, and she said, one of my friends is super cool. She's an entrepreneur. She's working on seaweed bioplastic, which is a carbon negative technology. And that got me real excited. I'm like, I have to meet this girl. So then I stalked Ivana on Instagram and LinkedIn. And I was like, holy shit, she's a boss lady.
Oh
like,
my gosh.
I was actually slightly intimidated because you looked so fashionable and just like your aura. Oh my God, like this assertive, gorgeous, intelligent woman. So I was slightly taken aback. I'm like, ooh, I thought you were going to be one of those really cocky and arrogant women.
Oh my gosh. Okay, everybody, all listeners, like if you want like amazing praise and just feel really good about yourself, come join this show. Like this is the best day ever.
I'm just speaking the truth. No, seriously, I was like, oh my gosh, she looks so cool. Like she's way out of my league. for my show. But then when I actually hopped on a call with her, Ivana was like the friendliest person I had ever met. She is so approachable, so personable, and so humble, and so knowledgeable at the same time. And I learned that she worked at Google and that she grew up in California. And the really cool part is that you're actually a Chinese-Peruvian.
Yes.
Which means you're Asian Latina.
Yes.
And that's such a cool combination. And see, at first, the Latina side did not come out. But as I spoke to her, and we were just driving in Ivana's car earlier, and she was playing reggaeton.
Yeah, blasting the reggaeton, you know, cruising down Toronto.
I'm like, that's definitely a Latina chick right there. You know? So tell us, what is it like growing up in a Chinese-Peruvian family, like having both Asian and Latina heritage? And I think you talked about like your upbringing and being bullied almost.
Yeah. Yes.
Tell us.
So I think now I've definitely come to a stage in my life where I'm really, really proud of my heritage, and I do feel like the experiences have helped shaped like a certain worldly perspective that I have, and I think more empathy for others. But I will say, growing up, so I grew up in a predominantly Asian community in Los Angeles. SGV, shout out if anyone knows where that is, but it's the San Gabriel Valley. It's predominantly Asian, and I remember distinctly growing up, it's almost as if like I actually remember a specific encounter. So I played volleyball in high school, and one of the mothers of my teammates made a remark that really made me feel less than. She was sort of like, she knew that I was of mixed heritage, and she was like, oh, you're not Mexican? Okay, you're not like the bad kind of Spanish. And honestly, as a high school student, you don't know what to do with that, because you're like, oh my gosh, there's so many layers to that.
Wait, was she Chinese?
She was Chinese, yeah.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I mean, it's not okay, but
It's not.
I've certainly, I'm fine following that, but just sort of like a small example of sort of blatant discrimination as well as like subtle discrimination that was experienced then. But in any case, it was weird. It was weird because I did grow up in a little bit of like a dual household where we ate Chinese food. I speak Cantonese fluently.
What about Spanish?
So here's the thing, right? Like, so when you have these sort of pressures growing up, I did take Spanish in high school, but it almost wasn't cool to speak Spanish outside of class. I know, which is so stupid because
it's the official language of the United States.
Yeah, and all of South America, well, excluding Brazil.
Sorry.
But
Absolutely.
it's like, had I known that earlier, I probably would have taken my education more seriously, but it's tough when you're just a teenager who doesn't know any better. But in any case, it was a very Asian community, and so in that regard, I felt like I wasn't truly one of them. And then, I went to UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, which also a lot of Asian people, but I think there was more diversity then, and I didn't think about race as much then. I think I felt like I fit in, and there were fewer questions around my background in a way that, I felt like I was being singled out for anything specific. And then it actually wasn't until I joined the corporate world and had my first job that I felt a bit like a minority again.
Really?
Yeah. So Google's a really big company, but I joined the sales team, and the sales team isn't, there are a couple Asian people there, but I'd say it wasn't like, maybe it's a more accurate representation of what the US actually looks like.
Wow. I am just so fascinated. Well, first of all, to backtrack a little bit, I think you touched on a really important topic that we don't often discuss, which is that there is actually a lot of racism within the Asian community toward
colorism as well.
Absolutely. And with recent movements in the United States, I think we've uncovered a lot of those issues, right? I think last year we talked about like anti-Blackness in the Asian community, and then you brought up anti-Hispanic sentiments, or basically anti anything that is not Asian, because I feel like Asians, we are a very homogenous society, right? And for many of us, we came from a country like China, Japan, Korea. These are very homogenous societies that is exclusively one race and one nationality. So we haven't really had that multicultural exposure, right?
Yeah. But and then so to that point, like even within the Asian community, when we talk about Asians, it certainly feels sometimes like Indians are excluded from that category.
So true.
And there's also the Southeast Asians and, you know, like the representation isn't quite fair. And they dive into this quite a bit too when they're doing studies of, I guess, like Asian representation in the corporate world. They kind of bucket everyone as Asian. But if you really, you know, dive into the numbers a bit deeper, you'll see that there isn't necessarily fair representation amongst the different countries or ethnicities.
That is so true. And like, how did that Chinese lady how was she even able to tell that you were part Hispanic?
I think she knew that I was, it must have been shared or discussed at some point, but she didn't know what kind of Spanish. And she kind of like automatically assumed Mexican, because Southern California is quite close to, like, we're closer to Mexico, and there are a lot of Mexicans in LA. But it was such a strange comment that you just don't even, like, you're just so flabbergasted. You don't know how to take it.
Where did that come from?
You're like, okay, first of all, like, there was nothing wrong with being Mexican.
Absolutely not.
But second of all, like, no, I'm not Mexican. And just how dare you? Like,
yeah, exactly. How dare she?
How dare you? Yeah.
Exactly. And it just speaks to her ignorance, right? Like, she probably has some preconceived notions around, I don't know, Latinas, Mexicans.
Sure.
And I think that is a problem that we don't talk about enough, like within the Asian community, right? Because behind closed doors, I feel like within the Asian community, we discuss other races, sometimes in very inconsiderate ways, based on our limited understanding of the world.
Yeah.
Right? And then coming to America and being assimilated into American culture, or is America more like a cultural melting pot, I guess. That's what they call it. Or right, because Canada's cultural mosaic and America's like a cultural melting pot, right?
A cultural mosaic. I hadn't heard that phrase before.
So it means in America, everybody's cultures kind of melt together, whereas in Canada, you are allowed to maintain and preserve your culture and still be respected for who you are. So we kind of embrace multiculturalism. That's kind of the reputation. And Toronto, by the way, is the world's most multicultural city, in case you didn't know.
I didn't know that. Although I have noticed, I guess I have noticed a lot of different cultures.
Right.
And I've really appreciated it since coming here. Yeah.
You did. So now let's talk about your journey to Toronto. So what brought you to Toronto, Ivana?
Oh, it is a long story. How much time do we have? But
Long story,
it's a long story. But basically, again, attributing everything back to the pandemic, I was working in big tech at Google, and my boyfriend was working at a hedge fund. And essentially, when the pandemic hit, there were a couple of things that changed, I think, our mentality of what it was we wanted to be spending, you know, a minimum of 40 hours a week doing.
Exactly.
It really makes you kind of rethink and dive deep and explore what's important to you. And so anyway, so he was working at a hedge fund. He ended up getting a different job offer in San Francisco. And so we're like, all right, well, we are lucky enough to be able to work remotely. We weren't beholden to our New York apartments. And honestly, like, who wants to stay in a shoebox apartment when you're in quarantine?
That's true.
So we decided to move to the West Coast, but rather than hop on a flight and just move in one go, we decided to actually take a road trip in a very safe manner. Like, we were avoiding high densely populated areas, and we were very careful about our route. But the idea for a road trip then became the idea of like, well, what if we just rented an RV and lived out of that for a little bit and did van life? And then we dived into it further and we're like, actually, if we're just going to do van life, like, why not buy a nice vintage van? Rock on. So we did. We bought a 1974 Volkswagen Westphalia. It's like this cute little yellow bus, which, if you think about the hippie movement, that's exactly what it is. And we packed everything up into storage in New York. I kept my job and he was sort of in transition. So he started building a separate company, a search fund actually, while we were on the road. And so 2.5 months later, we finally make our way cross country from New York to California. We took our sweet time and really just enjoyed the national parks and kind of enjoyed living out of this van. It's really funny when you're taking partner calls and they're like, "Where are you?" I'm like, "I'm in the back of a van."
Like, is that a virtual background? Or are you
Yeah,
just,
like, is that a virtual? Is that a Zoom background? I'm like, no. That's my bed up there.
Just the Grand Canyon or an
exactly.
RV.
Grand Canyon out my window. And so anyway, by the time we made it to California, his search fund really gained footing. And so a search fund is essentially...
I was just about to ask what is a search
sorry.
fund?
A search fund, basically what they do is they go and find and acquire companies that fit a certain criteria that they have. So theirs is, I'm not actually sure if I can share this, but
okay.
Anyway,
we'll
so yeah, their criteria is to find certain companies that are small enough that do not have a succession plan.
Right.
So you can, the owners are offering a full or majority sale. But in any case, they decide to refine their search to Canada, and the first company they found and acquired was actually here in Toronto, specifically in Mississauga. But that was, again, like our reason for moving up here to Toronto. And it was sort of the perfect catalyst because for me, I'd been looking to start a new chapter.
Yeah.
And I had always wanted to live abroad. I just kind of thought it'd be a little bit further. Like I thought it'd be
Europe,
across the ocean. Yeah, in Europe. But you know what? Go Canada. And so we're here.
Welcome to Canada. It's a
Thank
great
you.
country. And the funny thing is, I'm actually going to Boston next year. So we're kind of,
Yes.
I'm doing the reverse migration.
We're trading. We're trading places.
We're trading places, literally. But I'm glad you had to stop over here. And then we have a little crossover in Canada before I head up to the States. And connected.
Exactly.
This is super cool. So tell me, how is life in Toronto different from life in the States, in New York, in LA?
I don't know if I can provide a very good answer to that, just because we moved here in the dead of winter, in the middle of quarantine. I had to quarantine for 14 weeks by myself, which was very fun. So I haven't seen a whole lot of Toronto, but I think just based on first impressions, like to your point earlier, there is so much more of this appreciation for other cultures and ethnicities, and it's embraced here rather than... in certain parts of the States, it does feel like assimilation is forced or internalized to some degree. Whereas here, like, it's truly celebrated. And it's not a blanket statement on the States because there's so many pockets and the cities are different and, it's not fair to generalize. But I will say, here in Toronto, it's refreshing to see that. So it's exciting.
And you're celebrated for being mixed race.
Yeah.
But let me ask you, can most people tell that you're mixed race, like other Asians, when they look at you? Do they recognize that?
Generally, I think so.
They
Yeah.
do.
I've gotten like different things before. And I think my name throws people off because I have like an Eastern European first name.
Yeah.
But that's just a name that my dad liked. So it has there's no real story there.
I was just about to ask, like, why Ivana? Because that is the last name that an Asian person would pick.
I know. I don't know where he may have drawn the inspiration from Trump's ex-wife. But from what he told me, it was either between Ivana or Kimberly. So I'm kind of glad he went with Ivana.
I'm kind of glad he went with Ivana.
It's just unique. Yeah.
It's a very
different.
classy name.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
It's very sweet.
No, I love it. So you talked about how nowadays you're stepping more into your Latina heritage a lot more because back in California, back in San Francisco, which is a very Chinese dominated community, right? There are a lot of Chinese people in just on the West Coast in general, I believe.
Yeah.
And it's funny because we never talk about how Asians are, I don't want to say racist, exclusionary sometimes.
Yeah.
Or rather it stems from a place of ignorance toward other, like, even if you're half Asian and half something else, they regard you as the other half. Right?
Yeah. And it's strange because I don't know where that comes from. But I think in the US there's also, you've heard the myth of the model minority, right? That, hey, if Asians can do it, like, why can't everybody else who's not white but also not Asian? So I think it's really tricky. And to be fair, I don't know the entire history there, but I do know there were certain laws that were passed that sort of helped to facilitate that. Yeah. So it's just so complicated.
It is complicated, but what was I gonna say? I was gonna talk about how you didn't want to talk about your Latina heritage. You kind of just stuck to your Chinese heritage for the longest time, right? Because you wanted to fit in with the other Asian kids in California. So you kind of downplayed your Latina heritage.
Yep.
Latino heritage, Hispanic,
Yeah.
Peruvian heritage. What am I
Peruvian
saying?
heritage, Latinx heritage.
Latinx heritage. There we go.
Yes.
And now you are openly embracing that.
Yeah.
Which I love.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
This girl's spicy.
Not as spicy as some of my relatives. I'm pretty mild.
Oh, really? You still have relatives in Peru?
I do, yeah. Actually, a lot of my dad's side of the family is still in Lima, which is, if you haven't been, I mean, there's Machu Picchu, which you should definitely go see. But there's also, so Lima is a culinary destination in Peru. Like I want to say two of the top rated Michelin starred restaurants are in Lima.
Wow.
Yeah, Central and Maido, I think. But yeah, the food is incredible, and especially if you like seafood, which I do, top notch.
I can tell. We just had lunch, and I got a vegan salad bowl. She got a ceviche.
I got ceviche.
And
Like
that looks so good.
So spot on.
But guys, I'm not going back. So no, that looks really delicious though. And so back to seaweed bioplastic, which is going to be the topic of discussion for today, which is what Ivana is working on producing with her co-founder, I believe, right? So as part of the ocean series, right, where I cover the importance of protecting our oceans and why it is so important to safeguard our oceans as part of fighting against climate change and also preserving our planet for the future. So seaweed is effectively, or the process of seaweed farming, as Ivana told me, is carbon negative. Is that correct?
yes, that's what of earlier studies have indicated. So I should say that I think the efforts within the seaweed space are still quite early. There's a lot more research happening there. There's a lot of really cool work happening in that space too. But the exciting point here is that growing seaweed can actually be an effort in sequestering carbon. And it's awesome because, I mean, it's essentially like the trees of the ocean, but different in that seaweed does grow a lot faster. It's considered a zero input crop. So you don't need, I mean, technically it's growing in the water, right? So you don't need to water the plant, so to speak. You don't need fertilizers. You don't need a whole lot of other things to grow seaweed. And it grows very, very quickly. And it's also good for the ecosystem. It provides shelter for other marine creatures. It's a food, right, that may be more palatable to the Asian cuisine, and so it's changing a little bit here in the US and Canada, but yeah, it's a super exciting space, and there's so many commercial applications, which is why, and I should probably preface by saying that I'm by no means a scientist in this space. We do need to find someone who's a little bit more of an expert, but we're learning a lot within the industry just by talking to other leaders in the space and doing our own due diligence and research. But seaweed is super cool, and there's so many applications, and we're sort of just exploring, what's possible right now.
Absolutely. And you're infinitely more knowledgeable than me on the subject. So Ivana's just really, really humble. Anyway, so now I want to finally talk about, your climate awakening, your climate journey and why seaweed, because there's so many different aspects of sustainability that you can go into, whether it's, fighting fast fashion, food waste, carbon removal technologies, or even like circular and sharing economy. So what is it about seaweed that drew you to this industry? And yeah, like if you don't mind talking about your journey from Google transitioning to an entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's a long one, and I think it's actually one that I've had a seed for that since I was a little child, quite frankly. So I reflected on this the other day, and someone had asked me actually just what I did when I was a kid, like not what you want to do, but what did you do? And I remember when I was in the 5th grade, I had a small business.
You did?
I did.
You had a small business when you were in the 5th grade?
I had a small business in the 5th grade. It wasn't like it was not profitable. I mean, it was barely profitable, but
I'm very impressed.
Yeah, so I had noticed like several of my classmates back in the day. I don't know who's watching this, but anyway, like, yeah, we had to buy candy with quarters, and many of my classmates just sort of carried loose change in their pockets or in Ziploc bags. People didn't really have coin bags. And so I took some of my dad's old ties and I repurposed them and I sewed them into little coin bags and I sold them to my classmates. Wow. And that was my first foray into entrepreneurship, as well as sustainable fashion.
Yes.
Repurposing things.
Totally counts.
Yeah.
Sustainability, you made it a thing before it was a thing.
I didn't even know it was a thing, but apparently it's a thing.
It was. It is now. It's huge.
Yeah. And so, I did that. And then over the years, I thought I wanted to work in fashion. I actually interned for like a fashion company in New York prior to working full time at Google. But it just wasn't an industry that I wanted to be in. I think I preferred to be in tech. And, more recently, I'd been thinking a lot about sustainable fashion and sort of practicing some of that as a consumer. And so I'd shifted away from buying new as much as I could, and I would buy more secondhand clothing. But then ultimately I felt like really, truly the best thing to do was just to almost stop buying altogether.
Yeah.
Like I have a massive wardrobe. I do. I'm like a shoe
Well, that looks gorgeous.
person. Oh, thank
that
you.
Dress right there.
Thanks so much. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of great companies doing work out there, and I think there's a lot that can be done in fashion. But I ultimately decided that probably wasn't the world for me to go into. And so anyway, fast forward, came up here to Toronto. I spent some time off after leaving Google, which was weird because you work for this company, you have an entity that you report up to for nearly 8 years, and then all of a sudden you're kind of on your own, reporting to yourself. You have to stay accountable. But anyway, I had started to do research and kind of did some exploring, and for a period I thought about tackling food waste. So, there's a ton of food waste in the US and in Canada, unfortunately. And part of it is due to just like a logistical issue of not getting food to the right places in time because they're perishable. And so briefly thought about something related to dog food because I also acquired a dog in quarantine. One of the best coping mechanisms that
so cute.
I adopted. I love my dog and she's incredible. But so looked into that briefly. And honestly, just started talking to people, was sharing what I was doing, sharing my new findings, sharing my excitement. And I struck up a conversation with one of my girlfriends back in New York. She's still actually, I won't share her name, but she is full-time at a tech company right now.
Do I know her?
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. A different girl.
But I can introduce you later. And she and I have always talked about environmental sustainability. And so she shared a video with me. I think it was on, I don't remember what channel or what page it was on, but anyway, it was just a brief overview of why seaweed was so great and so powerful. And so we dived into it further. I did more reading, started talking to more people, started talking to seaweed farmers specifically.
You did?
And just started to do more research there. And we realized like, hey, maybe not a silver bullet per se, but instead of just focusing so much on being carbon neutral, like what if we found something that was actually carbon negative?
Exactly.
And like maybe our efforts should not necessarily be on this, but actually on, focusing on on carbon drawdown. That's like our ultimate goal. How can we suck more carbon out of the atmosphere and store it somewhere? And seaweed, I mean, again, like early stages, but seaweed looks like it can do that because it grows so quickly. Doesn't require a lot of input. Our coastlines are actually quite good. I mean, granted, there's different species of seaweed and different types grow differently.
Right.
But yeah, there is opportunity to explore this. And so we started looking in deeper, and there are so many commercial applications for seaweed. So, the one I mentioned here, which again, like a bit early still, but is on carbon sequestration. So just like capturing carbon, sinking the seaweed into the deep sea and holding carbon there. And they're fleshing out what the carbon credit economy could look like. Again, it's a little too early still, but a lot of very intelligent people are doing some interesting work in this space. So there's that. There's what else are they doing? They're like turning seaweed into fuel. Absolutely. Which is also really cool. There's
seaweed
bioplastics. Yeah, bioplastics, food, right?
Yes.
Like what if we pivoted? What if people, they're making sort of meat alternatives using seaweed? There's a lot that can be done. So people are getting really creative. There's seaweed in fashion even.
Really?
Yeah, there's a company called Pangaea. I think I pronounced that correctly, but they gained traction during COVID because they released a line of sweatpants, like matching coordinated sweats. They're actually quite cool. But they're shifting, where their goal is to make clothing out of seaweed, 100%. They're not quite there yet, but yeah, fashion is trending in that direction.
Question though,
Yes.
wouldn't it biodegrade really quickly?
I think there's definitely some sort of processing that they would need to do.
Synthetic fiber that need to
potentially
weave
so
into the
yeah
fabric.
it's not there yet. But again, like, people are looking into this, so it's just an exciting space.
It is so exciting. And see, when you brought up seaweed, I was picturing seaweed salad. Like, that's literally what I was picturing. But then you said no, there's industrial applications to seaweed as well. I was just fascinated. Like, you can use this to manufacture shoes, clothes, bioplastic fuel. And the cool thing about seaweed farming is that the entire process is carbon negative. So whatever the end product you end up using, the process in which it was used to grow sucks out carbon, right? Whereas like cattle farming is a carbon positive process, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Very
carbon positive, because you're, I mean, it's not even like the cow farts, right? It's like, it's the forest that you're tearing down,
exactly,
creating land for more cattle farms. Like in Brazil, I know this is a huge problem.
Yes.
So.
And because you have Latin American roots, did you hear about the news recently that the Amazon forest is now emitting more carbon dioxide in certain parts than it absorbs?
I read a headline for that, but yeah, if you could share more on that.
Yeah, for sure. So what a lot of people don't realize is that ranchers and loggers deliberately set certain parts of the Amazon forest on fire to clear that land for cattle farming, for soy production. And actually 80% of the world's soy production is used for livestock feed. So this is where, once again, animal agriculture is an extremely carbon intensive process that contributes to climate change. And on top of that, cow burps, actually not farts, are responsible for methane, which is even worse of a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So, and what you're doing, which I think is so cool, you're saying it's not even about sustainability. I think what you're doing is regeneration, because you're trying to suck carbon. You're trying to reverse climate change, right? By sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. Because I read that if you keep producing carbon neutral products, it's only going to slow down climate change, but climate change would, inevitably happen, because carbon neutral does not remove carbon from the atmosphere, and greenhouse effect is still going to take place. But it's only that we start to actively suck carbon out of the atmosphere that we have a chance, that we have a shot at the 1.5, keeping within the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's, I think there's also controversy though around just the idea of carbon credits, because you don't want to provide an opportunity for big corporations just to say like, oh, what I'm doing is okay because I'm buying carbon credits.
So what are carbon credits? Explain it to our listeners.
Sorry. So the carbon credits are, farmers will offer them basically to say like, hey, if I'm able to grow X amount, then we can calculate, approximately how much carbon it's actually taking out of the atmosphere. And in exchange, they sell this to companies that want to, claim to be carbon neutral, right? Because they don't actually, these massive corporations don't actually have any initiatives to say be carbon neutral. Right. But they offset their carbon output by buying these credits from farmers.
Right. And so you are personally not a proponent of that?
Not necessarily. I think like at this point, time is of the essence, right? So we just have to do whatever we can as quickly as possible. But that said, like there is controversy around that. Just to say like, hey, if we're doing this, this doesn't mean that corporations should stop all efforts to try to be as carbon neutral as possible, right? Like, but in addition to purchasing the carbon credits, like you really need to look into, your operations and what are things that you can change. Right.
So I see that as like a transitionary, policy, right? Like cap and trade, basically. So there's these carbon heavy industries and they can't pivot to a completely renewable powered business in one day. So in the meanwhile, like, I think it makes sense that that there is this tool called carbon credit that they can buy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the funny thing is that's actually how Microsoft offsets most of its emissions. It hasn't found a way to decarbonize its supply chain yet. It's just it has invested heavily into the reforestation projects around the world, and that's how it claims to be a carbon neutral company.
That's most companies.
That's the fine print, right? When you hear, oh, Google is carbon neutral, actually I think Google's doing a really impressive job. I think Google is actually spearheading the sustainability movement in Silicon Valley, because I remember just reading that by 2019, I think Google's completely 100% renewable power. I think it takes a lot of pride. I think Google took big strides to make itself a carbon neutral company. And it's not just about like, oh, I'm going to offset the company's emissions by, investing in reforestation. I think Google actually decarbonized its supply chain and data centers by making sure that it's 100% renewable power. So I think that's very admirable.
Yeah.
But Stripe, another interesting company, right? In Silicon Valley, doing a lot. And I love that you come from big tech. So you kind of, having worked for years in technology, you have this understanding of engineering and appreciation for technology. And
100%.
so my question for you then, Ivana, is like, as an entrepreneur, between corporations and governments, who do you think is going to be more effective at tackling climate change in a time-sensitive manner?
Well, it's tough. I mean, I think my answer is everyone has to play. It's like everybody has to run as fast as possible.
Yes.
I think personally, I considered it, right, going into policy. I think you're going to Harvard for public policy as well. But it just wasn't an area that I was necessarily passionate about either. And
sense.
so you kind of have to just go with what drives you.
Yeah.
Like, where are you intrinsically motivated? That said, I think all powers need to work together, collaborate. It's not just going to be the corporations. It's not just going to be the governments either. There's a lot of like lobbying that happens, and it's hard to say. I don't know what'll actually be the driving force, but I know that there are changes coming down the pipeline with new administrations. I'm not sure what's happening in Canada, and I can say that because I'm new to Canada. But with the Biden administration, they're putting a plan together that will help fund a lot of the efforts there. So
yeah, but recently, I'm not sure if you read the news with the infrastructure deal. The Republicans, basically the Democrats had to make a lot of compromise to get the bipartisan bill passed, because there were a lot of climate provisions in the first draft of the bill, and then Republicans were saying climate provisions should not go into an infrastructure deal. Yeah. So now they're fighting for a reconciliation bill to get those climate provisions in back again, because Biden said, I'm not signing this bill if there's not a reconciliation bill coming up. So that's tough. Like,
it's hard.
Politics is sluggish, right? Because like back and
is.
forth, especially in a Western democracy, there's two sides. And but what I love about that is like you're taking matters into your own hands as an entrepreneur, and you have a direct impact on the market, right? When you mass produce a product, now you're giving consumers the power. And if you come up with a cost-effective and a competitive product, through market economics, consumers are going to opt for your product, right? I think that's just a much faster way of tackling climate change, by giving consumers the choices to offer more sustainable products.
And I think in addition to that, like not just offering an alternative to a product, but you can, as a startup or as a consumer facing brand, you can, do your role in storytelling. I think there's a lot around education, right? Absolutely. There are a lot of companies that are greenwashing, that claim to be sustainable, but then really don't provide much more detail beyond that. There's a lot around, even just like within plastics, like how many people know the difference between biodegradable and compostable?
I did not know. Can you explain what is the difference?
Yeah. So certain, you'll find this, most of the plastic alternatives, like the ones made from corn, will say compostable, but that doesn't mean you can throw it into your backyard compost and let it degrade there, right? It's not actually biodegradable. So with some of those alternatives, they actually need to be taken to a specific industrial facility to be composted there.
Right.
If it doesn't, then it's not going to break down the same way the way that it's intended. So, and I didn't know this, right? Like I didn't know this a couple years ago. And I believed, like many others, I presume, that by choosing the corn alternative, like, oh, I'm doing my part here. I'm not choosing the single-use plastic. But unless it ends up in that industrial facility,
correct.
It's so hard. Like if you really want to look at the life cycle of a product, like what does it take to make this spoon or that bag? Like what is the carbon emission over the entire lifespan of the product? And I think most consumers, like myself even, don't really make that conscious decision or think about it. You just go about your day.
that's why I feel like the burden should not be on the consumer, because at that level it's just like we are so bogged down in our day-to-day lives. There's so many, we make like a million decisions a day, and the last thing we want to worry about is like try to pick between this product and that product, which is why I think as an entrepreneur you have such a huge impact, because you are saying you don't have to make that choice. When we design this product, we have already done the hard work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I agree, totally agree. And I also think an extension of that hard work is how can we take this massive story on climate and shrink it, condense it, simplify it, so that maybe the onus around self-educating also isn't on the consumer. Because I do think all individual consumer choices coming together can move mountains with corporations by demanding more. And we're seeing this with companies sort of pivoting and adopting more sustainable practices because consumers are demanding it. Gen Z in particular being very vocal.
Gen Z.
Yeah, climate activists. So yeah, it takes everyone to play a role.
But Ivana, you and I, we're both millennials.
Yeah.
And we want to say to the Gen Zers, millennials have not given up on climate change. We're doing our part as well.
We're trying. Yeah, we're really trying here.
We are absolutely trying. That is fantastic, gosh. And you brought up corporations. So I also think about like, problems like food waste, right? A lot of that is commercial level food waste, and also like if you think about corporate events, like especially at a company like Google, there's so many corporatized food waste or corporatized consumption, right? So I feel like corporations should also step up in addition to individuals, like corporations that don't work in sustainability but are corporate consumers of like food and products like office supplies,
Yeah, exactly.
Because think about like they buy everything in bulk, right?
And that was sort of our approach. And I should say, like, again, we're quite early in this and we may pivot. That's part of building a company. You realize where your strengths are and where you can make a difference. But when we looked into bioplastics, we were particularly and when I say bioplastics, what I actually mean is a seaweed-based alternative to plastic that doesn't actually contain plastic. So it's not going to be a mix of plastic and...
It's going to be pure seaweed.
Ideally, it would be pure seaweed.
So I can actually eat it. Technically.
You could, but you wouldn't want to.
It's going to taste gross.
And there's some companies that actually have this technology, right?
Wait, but what about the structural integrity? Because seaweed is very soft.
Yes, it is really soft, yeah. But you can create a film. There's a company, I think they're based out of the UK. I think they're called Ookla. Oh, geez. I should Google it. I can't remember the name exactly. But they created these little... packets like that are seaweed based that will contain water. So you can pop them in for marathons, or you can put ketchup packets will instead be in the seaweed like alginate based film. And like it is technically edible.
Why would you want to eat it?
Probably wouldn't want to. Truthfully, like you can eat it. Should you? Maybe not. But the point here is that it would biodegrade.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're saying there's industrial applications to these films, these seaweed, whatever, like be creative, right? We don't have to just make them edible.
Yeah. And so an idea that we were pursuing, because again, like we're not going to solve the world's problem, but we can try to tackle a very specific issue. So one idea we were thinking about was around the flexible packaging for produce in grocery stores. Like, would there be a way to reinforce this film so that actually, and there's been studies around this where they use like a specific like casein protein injected into the film can actually preserve like the longevity of the produce longer so it doesn't go to rot, and it creates like an oxygen barrier. But if we could do this for produce so that it lasts longer, you don't have the plastic film, and for food to be turned back into compost, right now you can't exactly do that because let's say you buy a bag of like bell peppers that come in a plastic wrapper, you'd have to separate the two, right? And that plastic film isn't recyclable because it's like a lower density polyethylene. And so what if we create something that's actually biodegradable, and then when the peppers rot or they don't all sell, then you throw it all into an anaerobic digester and it goes to compost.
Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh, that is... I love that. And you brought up such a good point about composting. Whenever I see a product that is compostable, but keep in mind that it might not actually end up in a composting facility. It might just rot in a landfill most of the time. See, the frustrating thing about, I live in a condo.
Yeah.
And there is no composting in my condo, and it frustrates the shit out of me. So like, am I supposed to get one of those, what is that Japanese bokashi? What is it called?
Oh
System?
yeah,
What is it
it's
called?
the multi-tiered system, right?
The Japanese whatever system, like you can compost in it or
Yeah.
whatever, or you have to pay a company like TerraCycle to pick up your compost, and then you pay them, and then they would compost it for you.
Yeah, it's not easy in these big cities. I live in a condo too, and I started growing a little herb garden on my balcony.
Oh, you were doing backyard,
Yeah,
like,
backyard.
composting.
But well, no, because then I thought about composting, but I was like, I don't really have enough place, like enough. There's too much waste and not enough resources to kind of turn into dirt versus living in a home.
Oh gosh, that's the one thing I do not like about Toronto. There's not enough composting facilities here. So if you're a listener in Toronto and you're watching this video or listening to the podcast, please consider starting a composting facility. So
Yeah,
help us
do
out
it.
your
Do
composting
it.
business. Do it. And also get in touch with Ivana. But what about, I feel like California on the whole is very like climate woke, right? So I'm sure everybody there composts.
There, I would say it varies depending on like county and city, but from what I remember in San Francisco, like there were specific compost bins. There's different things done by municipalities.
Yes. Wait,
So-
let me backtrack a little bit, because our listeners might be wondering, why is this so important to compost? Why is it such a big deal that I dump that, that apple peel into the garbage bin? Like, why is it so important that they have to compost? What difference does it make in terms of carbon emissions?
Yeah. So, well, one is if you can turn it back into compost, you're giving it a second life, right? So it can be used as a fertilizer for a lot of farms, as cities will often do.
Right.
The other point too is if it doesn't go into the compost, then it goes to landfill. And depending on the landfill, there are different kinds, but for the ones where it's just a big old dump and all the trash gets thrown on top of it, if there isn't access to oxygen, then your apple core won't actually degrade.
Right. It
So-
has to be anaerobic.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
it to compost. So if it ends up in a landfill, it's just going to be incinerated along with the rest of the trash, right?
Right.
So that's just going to turn into carbon emissions.
Yep, exactly.
So have you read that thing on the internet, like with the banana peel dilemma? Have you read about it?
No, I haven't.
It's like, what happens if you see a banana peel on the street? Are you supposed to put it in the garbage bin, or are you supposed to like
Oh.
compost? I think I read a meme like that somewhere,
Interesting. No, I haven't seen that one.
right? Because apparently some people said you're supposed to letting it rot is better than dumping into the trash, because then it would go to landfill or something. So you should compost it. I think. Let me.
So if you find a banana peel on the sidewalk, you
Yeah.
should just go dump it on a patch of dirt somewhere.
Yes, I think that was the argument for that,
Interesting.
and not put it in the trash.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to say. I mean, there are a couple. I think there's some major players in waste, like Waste Management's one of them. There are a couple other ones too.
Wait, hold on. Why does banana peel compost in the dirt?
Why does a banana peel compost in the dirt?
Why is dirt anaerobic? That's the part I don't understand. Yeah, when people talk about backyard composting, I'm like, why is that environment anaerobic?
Yeah, I think it needs to be. So it's like, I don't actually know if it would like biodegrade on top of the dirt. Like typically you need to have a few layers.
Oh,
Right? So you'd need to have
to
like a layer of like biomatter, like drier materials like leaves and dirt and twigs and things like that, and then you have your wet matter, and then you put, I think, soil on top of that.
But wouldn't it smell in your backyard if you were to
No, it's not
compost?
supposed to. So if it's done correctly, it actually turns into like a very rich soil essentially.
Wow.
But it has to be done correctly. And there's certain things that you don't put into backyard compost. Like you're not supposed to put like dairy or meats or animal parts, like largely just vegetables, but also not, I think you want to stay away from like onions and garlic.
That's gonna smell. That's gonna smell.
So it's kind of a specific process.
Interesting. I should learn more about composting. Wow, there's a whole science behind it.
Yeah.
See, I learned about it in
There's a
grade
lot of
school.
YouTube videos too.
Forgotten all about it. That zero waste lifestyle. Oh man. I
Yeah.
should get back into it. That's super cool. Wow. So you composted, right? Back when you lived in California.
No, because I threw things into a compost bin, and that was like whisked away by the city.
The bin would it wouldn't compost in the bin.
No,
I saw-
sorry. Yeah, I meant it was like a green container. Like, please throw your compost
So there's
in the bin.
nothing magical about the green bin. It's just a bin.
It's just a collection.
But they have to
But
take it to
they
a,
have a process.
Oh,
Yeah.
so dumb.
No, not at all. It's a
I
good
thought there's something
question.
magical happening inside that bin that makes it compost.
No,
Whoops.
not the big green bins, but
It's just for separation. That's
just
why they
for
color it.
separation. Yeah, exactly.
Nothing. Although they should probably come up with a bin that, like, when you dump in it, it just automatically creates this environment for.
They
anaerobic.
should. I think
All
I've
around the
actually
city,
I've
right?
seen some in New York.
You have.
I
New York
have.
is so ahead of the game. Why is Toronto so behind?
I don't know. Funding?
Brooklyn,
Money?
actually, I feel like there's quite a few composting facilities, right? Like,
Yeah.
Brooklyn is very environmentally conscious nowadays.
Yeah, there's like urban farms. There's a lot of cool stuff happening in Brooklyn.
Did you live in Brooklyn or Manhattan?
I
or
lived in the Upper West Side, so right by Central Park.
where Columbia University is.
Yes. Yeah.
You live. So isn't that like Harlem?
No, it's like 71st Street and Columbus Ave.
So right. So that's
It's like the bottom. It's like like Central Park is so
Midtown
long.
Manhattan.
No,
further.
so there's like
Guys, I'm not from New York,
okay.
so
It's okay. I was very lost too until I got lost enough times to be like, all right, I better figure out how the cities works. But New York is really cool because it's a whole grid system, right? Yeah. So it's you have the streets that go from bottom to top. So it's like first, second, third, blah, 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 goes all the way up. So I was up on 71st, which is right where it's pretty much right where Central Park starts and goes up. Yeah.
That's so much fun. Like, did I tell you about the whole bedbug story that I had in New York?
No.
Oh my gosh. So guys, I have a love-hate relationship with New York because back in 2018, I remember it was a Halloween weekend. I was on a business trip. I still work at Vice, and Vice headquarters is in Brooklyn, right? But then my company got me an Airbnb at, I think, 55 Avenue. It's Midtown Manhattan, right?
Yeah, that's about Midtown.
Midtown,
Yes.
right? And the Airbnb was gorgeous. But the next day, I woke up with like bites. Everyone like, why is it so itchy? I'm
that's
like,
so scary.
yeah. And then my colleague was like, I think that could be bed bugs. And I've never heard of bed bugs until that point. I just never encountered them. I'm holy shit. So for 5 whole days, I was homeless in New York because I shipped off my entire luggage to be fumigated, right?
Right.
So I'll tell you a funny story. What happened was I called the bed bugs, whatever extermination company, and they're like, we have to take all your luggage. But I'm like, how am I? Because I was staying in New York. I'm like, I don't have any changed clothes. Like, I don't have anything. So what happened was I basically dumped all my luggage into my suitcase, and then that was shipped off for fumigation. And then I only had then at 8 a.m. I remember so clearly, at 8 a.m. I took the New York Metro to go to the nearest Uniqlo, and then I went there and I bought like a bag, a winter jacket, because it was cold. It was October.
Yes. Oh no.
Everything with the price tags on, because I'm like, when the fumigation
Are
is
you
done,
return this?
I'm gonna return all of this. So it literally looks like a movie scene where I like stormed into Uniqlo. Yeah, I took the winter jacket, I took like a bag, everything with the price. I walked out of the store with price tags on. I'm like, I'm gonna return it before the end of my trip. Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
It was just
Yeah, that's
fun.
that's a terrible introduction to
That
New
was a
York. I'm
terrible
sorry.
introduction. But New York it should be more fun. It was not my first time in New York, but after that I'm just like, fuck. And then
That's a traumatizing.
and then
That's
they moved
traumatizing.
me to a hotel in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg.
Yeah.
The hotel was super nice. But the next day I woke up with a flood. Not a flood, but like my floor was flooded, like a huge ass leak. Yeah, and it felt like I woke up and I was like walking, like, why does it feel like I'm walking in a river? And I realized, but since the bedbug situation, I'm like, that is much better than a bedbug situation.
Yeah.
I can deal with like a wet floor.
Yeah. Oh no. It sounds like New York doesn't want you.
New York hates me. New York just hates me. Somebody, please change my experience.
Oh, I'm
here.
sorry. I love New York City. I used to go there all the time.
I'm not
and
welcome in New York.
It's okay. It's okay. Boston is welcoming you with open arms.
Oh my god, let's not jinx it. Boston, you better
Knock on-
you
knock
better
on wood.
fucking
Knock on tree.
knock on, where is wood? There. Knock
Yeah.
on wood. Yeah, Boston so far has been great. It's just I've only been to Cambridge, not even Boston.
Yeah.
But New York has been fun for you living there.
Oh yeah, amazing. Like for anyone who has thought about moving to New York or even briefly entertained the idea, 100% you should do it.
Yeah.
Just go. I went when I was, so my first trip to New York, or my first like real trip to New York was actually in college when I was doing my unpaid fashion internship. Thankfully, I actually interned at Google the summer beforehand. So I saved up money. And then the summer after, when I was like, let me try my hand in fashion, I went to New York and I was an unpaid intern. So I was burning through my savings, burning through rent. I wasn't eating very much because I was like, I'm poor. I cannot afford food right now.
Well, you look great.
Oh,
so.
Thanks. No, this is not bad advice. This is bad advice, guys. But yeah, I remember I ate from the McDonald's dollar menu pretty often. And I think they would give you like a survey. And if you took that survey, you'd get $1 off your next meal. So I'm like, oh, there goes my next meal.
Wow.
It's kind of sad. But anyway, all to say, it was one of the most memorable summers of my entire life. It was like the entrance into my 20s. I was young and just...
You still are?
Still am. I think forever will be in spirit, like young in spirit.
She just is.
But yeah, like for anyone with a dream or just an inkling to try something new, go for it.
Yeah.
Do it. You can make it happen.
Well, New York is like the epicenter of everything, right? Fashion, technology, economics, finance.
Yes. So much.
It's just the bustling, hustling city. Like
there's arts, there's culture, music, you know, literally anything you want to find, you will find there.
Absolutely. It was very overwhelming. Like I'm a big city girl. I grew up in Beijing and then Toronto. But even then, New York, I was like, damn, being in New York or just you know, being immersed in that environment. Like I think I was at Times Square station and just like looking at people like roaming past me. I'm like, wow, this is it was next level.
But
it's a restless city, right? The city that never sleeps. I thought that was London. That was New York?
I don't think so. I think that's New York.
Both. Yeah, super cool. Okay, next I want to talk about your life as an entrepreneur. So I'm curious because ever since I started my podcast, I do feel like my life is more entrepreneur-like. It's hectic.
Are you working full-time as well?
I am working full-time.
Oh, yeah, that's hectic.
Everybody, I have no life. Let's just put it out there. You know, if you're wondering what I'm doing when you're not seeing me, I'm probably editing videos or like, you know, trying to figure out the setup for this studio and booking Airbnbs and stuff. But I want to ask you, so Ivana, what is your day-to-day like as an entrepreneur, and how do you decide how to manage your time and what to do, and what kind of goals do you set for yourself? Like, how do you even know what should be the target that you should be aiming for now that you no longer have a manager managing you?
I know. It was definitely a strange adjustment at first, like figuring out, okay, I was telling my boyfriend, it's sort of like you have a blank canvas, right? Completely blank canvas and a paintbrush. You're like, all right, what do I do now? So I recognized that I probably needed just like a little bit of structure in the beginning, because before all of this, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I knew I wanted to create something, but I wasn't sure what that was going to look like. And so one of the first things I did was actually apply to a mentorship program, because I was like, I think I'd benefit from having a mentor. Not to mention in COVID, like I suddenly didn't have coworkers, and it can be a very lonely journey as a founder. And this is before I found my co-founder as well. So I joined a mentorship program through Fast Track. It's first round Fast Track, and highly recommend it. You get paired with someone who is quite seasoned, I think in the tech space, but maybe not exclusive to tech. And I had a fabulous mentor who, you know, helped coach me, and it was every 2 weeks we'd meet. And so suddenly I had an accountability partner, right? Someone who I'd kind of report to and share my findings, and kind of share my timeline and what I was working on. So she helped me to really regroup my thoughts and think about, all right, how do I approach this strategically? So in the beginning, I was refining different ideas and kind of, all right, here are the ones that interest me. Here's where I see the opportunity. Let me refine and then decide which one interests me more. So for a while, it was actually a lot of work within the dog food space. And then, of course, things change and you need to be adaptable. And so struck up a conversation with one of my close friends, and we talked a lot about doing something together. And so we pivoted and are now doing stuff in the seaweed space. But to answer your question just around like my day-to-day, I think it changes like pretty often. And the
Right.
beauty of being an entrepreneur is that you also get to determine your own schedule. So whether it's like waking up earlier to do something or waking up a little later, and you don't have that, there's not that concept of FaceTime of just kind of like being present or being at your computer. It's like you want to go for a run and take a nap, like you can totally do that as long as you feel like you're actually moving towards something.
Right.
So now it's how do you quantify your goals? So
Exactly.
what does your goal look like?
Or
Is it revenue? Like
Raise
if you're not
capital.
quite there yet, then is it like X amount of meetings? Like is it, how do you create these like timelines that you work towards? And it's something that we're learning every single day. So we're doing a lot in terms of reading and talking to people. We're looking for accelerator programs to apply to,
Nice.
all while we're refining our thesis. And initially, and then we'll eventually go into a testing phase. Like how do we get this made? Like how do we create prototypes? How do we validate it? How do we commercialize it? How can we be competitive on price, and who's going to be our customer? So we're a little bit at a crossroads where it could actually really change the outcome of everything, because this entire time we've been thinking about like a B2B sort of company where we'd be selling bioplastic or alternative to plastic film to other companies or, to grocery stores or retailers, whatever. But now what we're thinking is, okay, if the ultimate goal is carbon drawdown and we want more consumers to adopt seaweed-based products, maybe what we should actually do is create a consumer good, like consumer-facing product, and then kind of introduce them to seaweed, right? Like, how can we push mass adoption a different way?
I think B2B would also work if you sell this to supermarkets, to restaurants, right?
Of course, that could work too. The issue, though, that we don't have an answer with for quite right now is, again, how are we competing on price?
That is true. That is true. Also, because economies of scale, like you're a very early stage.
Yeah, exactly. Like it could just be a more premium product, but plastic is just so cheap. It's so cheap.
That's the problem with plastic. It's so cheap, and it's like, and even when I talk to a lot of like restaurants who are striving to be sustainable or like vegan, I've spoken to a couple of vegan entrepreneurs. I'm like, why do you use plastic? And they're like, we don't want to use plastic, but as an early stage startup, we have no choice. It's the only cost-effective solution.
Right.
Yeah. So that's tough. But the good thing, like you said, seaweed is abundant and it doesn't take a lot to grow. So I would argue in the future, if seaweed farming becomes a widespread thing, the cost of production is going to be way cheaper than oil and gas, because think about fracking and think about like, you have to create these mines. And,
I think there's still some obstacles. So
natural gas
here in, at least in Canada and the US, like there's still hurdles in terms of obtaining a permit to become a seaweed farmer, to lay claim to certain parts of the ocean, to then build out your farms. I think there's a lot of knowledge sharing that also needs to be done, because it's no easy feat, right? It's like with anything, if you have like a bad season or a bad crop, it all goes to waste. You do lose a lot of time there. And I do think labor is still like relatively expensive here versus in Asia. Like there's just more developed markets for seaweed. So labor is cheaper there. So we've also entertained the idea of like, what if we outsource? But again, we want to be careful, because if you're shipping the product, that's something to factor in as well.
Right.
So to that point, like there's just a lot to think about. So
there is. But I mean, if it's more abundant in Asia, I would think the cost of shipping, even the carbon cost, it's beneficial for the environment, right? If you're shipping in bulk. Right. And international freight, it happens every day. There's cargo, international cargo.
There's cargo,
so it's already
regardless.
Exactly. So might as well piggyback on that if you're doing something good for the planet. My question for you is like, are you working with scientists to develop this prototype at the moment? Do you have a lab? Like I'm so curious, like what other entrepreneurs are doing on a day-to-day basis. Like,
not yet. And that's because we want to be sure that this is the route we want to go down first. But that's also part of our to-do list, right? Is to find like the brains to partner with. We have found some like pretty rudimentary like recipes online to do this, but we probably want to create some sort of like proprietary tech here. And so the next step would be, of course, like expanding our team, finding another person who's interested on working on this with us. And I know that there's different ways to do this. So I think there's the benefit of like certain accelerator programs can connect you with the right people, or you can really just like go on a search on your own, or hire a headhunter and try to find someone to connect you with the right person.
Wow. And how did you meet your co-founder?
She and I actually go back. We knew each other in college. We didn't know each other well, but we had overlapping social circles. And then she moved to New York shortly after I did, and we just started spending more time together. And we really, really clicked. And we'd always connected on many things, but especially on the element of environmental sustainability. And she worked in big tech. I worked in big tech. It just sort of like the stars aligned.
Oh my gosh! So I've always wanted to ask you because I've had 2 failed startups one failed startup in the past, and it's just been difficult for me to find a co-founder. Like actually one of my previous co-founders, she was one of my closest friends, and it almost broke our friendship venturing into a business together. So I feel like finding a co-founder is like finding a person to marry, except it's not marriage. Like the joint project here is it's a company. Or I can make the reverse analogy. Marriage is a lot like finding a business partner, except the company is the life project that you're working on. So for you, how do you gauge compatibility before with a business partner before you really commit to this serious partnership with
totally
them?
And I think that's such a good question, and actually something I hadn't shared before was I had actually built a team with a fellow co-founder at Google, and we assembled a team and we pitched an idea to Area 120, which is Google's internal incubation program. Sick. So we're basically like, hey, we have an idea for a company that we want to build. It was a mentorship app. It was more of like a social endeavor. But
I love it.
The thing is, like, I think my co-founder and I got along pretty well, but one thing we overlooked was the fact that our skill sets were almost identical. Like a little too similar.
What's your background again? Like
it's like sales, partnerships, marketing.
Right.
Yeah. And so we had done very similar work, right? And so that was one consideration. The other consideration was we were so eager to recruit people that we didn't necessarily vet fit and commitment as thoroughly as we should have.
Right.
So, going up to pitch day, one of our engineers like dropped out because he didn't want to commit to the time that was required to put into this project. So all to say, like, finding a solid team is one of the hardest but most important things you'll have to do. With my current co-founder, she and I, like, aside from our friendship, have also had pretty candid conversations around our styles, like working styles, our skill sets. Are we complementary or are we redundant?
Yes.
Right? Like, where is our gap? And also just be really honest. And this is where you need to put ego aside. Like, what are your weaknesses? What are you good at? What am I good at? How can we work better together as a team? Do I trust you? And also, like, what is your long-term view? Like, how much are you willing to sacrifice to make this a reality? And then kind of talking about, how that aligns with our personal goals too.
I love that.
Yeah.
And, I do see the parallel, right, between being business partners and being life partners.
Yeah.
Because you have to talk about those tough conversations. Like you said, let's discuss our skill sets. Is it complementary or is it redundant?
Yeah.
And are you willing to, take on these financial risks with me? Because now you guys are in a joint partnership. Your finances are intertwined.
Yeah.
Right. A lot is at stake. And as the company scales, it's like, and how do you make sure they step up to the game and they carry the weight in growing this business, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's so tough. It's like,
it's hard. And I've seen founders do really well together. I've seen teams fall apart. Like, some things I think you do your very best, but it's hard to predict the future.
Jesus Christ. It's so
I mean,
hard.
it sounds like you speak from experience too, right?
Well, failed relationships of all kinds, business.
God,
and
no.
I'm not even gonna go there. I'm terrible.
That's not what I meant.
I'm terrible at finding a partner in all aspects of life. Let's put it that way. But like, there's so much to learn from you, because, man, now it makes sense why she's so eloquent. She is a seasoned entrepreneur, right? Like, goes way back to the incubator of Google. I'm like, this makes sense now. Okay. Like, she built up her skills over time. You were not born like this, or maybe you were just born this eloquent and articulate.
No. I think it takes practice, and I think it takes, just
and you
a
work
lot
in
of
sales.
practice.
That explains everything. Guys,
Yeah.
I'm an engineer, so if I'm ever inarticulate, my degree explains it all. Okay, I blame it on 4 years of engineering school where I typed more in code than in English. So
Well, I definitely, I could barely even program like a web page. So that is, like, you're out of my league in
I
that way.
probably can't either because I can't do React, and I'm an iOS developer now. I've specialized and gone down
I
that
don't even know the
rabbit
different
hole.
languages, but in any case.
Well, you are perfectly fluent in English, and that's all we need for this podcast. So, but yeah, looking at time, what time is it now? Oh my gosh. I feel like-
It's 4:23.
Okay, perfect. So maybe we should wrap up.
Okay,
right?
let's do it.
Okay, awesome. Wow, Ivana, you shared with us so many great stories, of entrepreneurship, and then also of your transition from having a stable job at Google and then taking that leap of faith into entrepreneurship. I think your story is going to inspire so many people. And then you educated us on composting and seaweed, and you got me so excited because now I need to watch those YouTube videos to learn how to compost properly when I have the opportunity to, because I live in a condo right now. It's really hard. So yeah, it's just been a pleasure having you on the show, and thank you so much for helping me with the setup. For those of you who don't know, I want to give a huge shout out to Ivana for helping me set up.
No problem.
There's 3 cameras. You don't see it, but it's you have no idea how we set it up. I'm gonna take a photo of how we set up that iPad.
Please. I know this is like my first dive into being like a camera and lighting technician, so I hope that my efforts paid off.
You are a Renaissance woman. What can I say? And please promise me that no matter what happens, I really hope that you don't give up on your business. I think it's totally reasonable to pivot, but you're doing such important work, and
Thanks.
there are very few people in this world who are as brilliant as you, but also choosing to work on the right cause. And this was a conversation I had with someone else a while ago, which is that there's so many brilliant people, but so many of them are working on such trivial problems.
Yeah, I know. This is truly a problem that affects all of us, right? And some more disproportionately more than others. So I think this is an issue that just doesn't have time for debate, right? Like, we can't talk about whether it's real or not or how serious it is. Like, I think we just have to get to work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's good for, action oriented people like you and me. But now we gotta really capitalize on those skills. We have to mobilize a larger segment of the demographic.
Yeah. And we're doing it together,
Yes,
right?
we
Like,
are.
you are spreading awareness. You're building community.
I am.
This is super important work.
Thank you so much. Well, you're doing much more important work, and I can't wait to finally be able to throw out all my plastic. Well, not throw out, I'm going to use them up, but hopefully never ever have to purchase plastic wrap for the rest of my life again, because you come up with a product that is much better and more carbon.
Yes.
And it's carbon negative.
Yeah. Stay tuned. I know we're only 2 months in, but hopefully in a year or so, there's some big updates.
Ooh. I'll be the first buyer of your product, your
thanks.
prototype. And maybe you're going to be on Shark Tank, right? Is that a possibility?
We'll see. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I think anything is possible.
Anything is possible, guys. That's the takeaway from this podcast episode. Anything is possible.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Ivana, for being on Make Peace Not Beef.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is super fun. Like, I feel like a celebrity.
You are a celebrity. Look at that dress. So, by the way, a fun story. So, before we got here, so Ivana was driving and it was raining outside. And then I was waiting for her in the car, and I'm like, where did this girl go? Because she was supposed to be the one driving, and I couldn't find her. And then I realized that someone else had stopped her on the street asking her about her dress.
I know. I thought
in the rain.
I know. I actually thought they were going to stop to ask me about the parking meter and how it worked. But no, she wanted to know where my dress was from. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, it's BCBG, Max Azria.
Yeah, a gorgeous dress worn by a gorgeous woman.
Oh, thanks.
And who's all the more intelligent. So yeah, you're the best dressed person on my podcast.
Oh, wow. Yeah, upping the ante.
Absolutely.
All right, y'all have to step it up. I'm just
Step
kidding.
it up. You do, though. Especially me.
No.
All right. Well, it was super fun chatting with you, Ivana, and I hope
Yes.
to have you back in a year to see where your
Yeah.
business is going.
Definitely. Let's do it.
Can't wait.
Give me a timeline.
Absolutely. I'm putting pressure on you, so you actually have to get to work.
I know.
'Cause
Yes.
I'm expecting a product from you. No pressure. I'm just kidding. I wish I could do what you're doing. I couldn't do 10% of what you're doing, so I admire
You totally
so
couldn't.
much.
But,
I totally could not.
But I think what you're doing is equally important.
No, this is not what I'm doing. This is what you are doing. You helped me set up this.
Oh,
space,
gosh.
so you can do what I can do, and also you can do what you can do. But the reverse is not true. So
That's false, but
that's super fun. All right. Well, thank you so much, listeners, for tuning into Make Peace Not Beef, or viewers, if you're watching the YouTube version of this episode. We put so much work into putting this episode together, so we really hope you enjoyed it. And I just want to give a huge shout out to Ivana for being such a great guest and also helping me set up everything.
my
I know I
gosh.
said that a million times, and really excited to have you here, Ivana.
Thank you.
And looking forward to your future success.
yeah. Oh, well, thank you. And I look forward to seeing the growth of this podcast. I'm
Pressure.
sure I'll be like,
Pressure.
no, it'll be, I'm like, oh, I was one of the first guests.
Yes.
But no, this is super fun. Thank you so much for letting me be here and for letting me use your platform to share my budding story. Like, truly, I think there's a lot of really cool innovation related to climate change, and people are making some interesting strides. So stay curious and explore and educate yourself, and yeah, keep talking.
Yes, let's go get it, girl. Okay, I think
Alrighty.
we are done.
We're good.
Yes.
Wow.
Awesome.
Woo!
Woo,
I'm
we're done.
I'm a little sweaty.
Oh my God, you were fantastic.